Hi, my name's Kate, and I started playing fantasy basketball a season ago. I got really keen on the analytics, and so today I'm just taking a look at the relationship between minutes and points. And so this plot here is the real world. So on the x-axis, we have the number of minutes played. On the y-axis, we have the number of points scored. And this number of points scored is your free throws, your field goals, and your three-point shots total. So each of these points represents a player and the number of points they scored in a game and the number of minutes they played. And so there's a pretty clear relationship here, which is if you're not playing any minutes, you're not scoring any points. And then as you play more minutes, you score more points. None of this is a surprise, right? Um, what I did find interesting when I looked at this relationship is that there does appear to be like some theoretical limit, right? So in physical world, you can only have so many transitions up and back the court. You can only have so many ball positions. So if you play 10 minutes, most players aren't scoring more than 10 points. Similarly, you play 20 minutes, it's very unlikely anyone scores more than 20 points. 30 minutes, no one's scoring more than 30 points. Very few, like one player over here, 40 minutes. Yeah, people aren't scoring more than 40 points, roughly. So there seems to be this line, basically, which is the theoretical maximum how many points you can score given the number of minutes you played. And I'm kind of curious about whether I'm sure someone thought about this, done the maths. If you know, drop a link. I'd love to have a look at it. Um, but yeah, so that was quite interesting to me. But this is all, I should say, this is all real world. Um, and I'm interested in, say, fantasy world. So let's take a look at fantasy world. Take a little while to load. The same relationships basically hold here. So on my x-axis, I have my minutes played. On my y-axis, I have the number of fantasy points scored. Now, each different league will have your own scoring system, but I suspect the relationships will be pretty similar because they'll all be built off at their core the number of points scored. There'll be other things as well, like blocks, assists, steals, but fundamentally, it's points scored that are going to matter the most to how many fantasy points you could get. And you can see the big change actually is the access before with the top was 40 points and now it's gone to 150. So that changes things a little bit, but the standout player here, Jokic played 43 minutes during one game this year and scored 154 points. And that's the top fantasy points scored um, in 2026 in my league. He was also the top point scorer if I looked at the previous game. Yeah. So that physical limit on how many points scored still exists here. I think it's interesting to point out that my line of best fit here, so the number of minutes played versus the number of fantasy points scored, and the same in the previous plot, like this is just kind of the average, but there is a bit of variability. So if I look here, like, and I come out here, this is, Cooper Flag played 48 minutes and they scored 28 fantasy points. Whereas if I come up here, Um, take a little while to load. Yeah, similar number of minutes, 131 fantasy points. So that's almost a 100-point fantasy difference for the same number of minutes played. So as you get further out, the spread in your data actually gets bigger compared to here, where you had a much smaller spread. So this is what's known as like heteroscedasticity in stats. And I didn't account for this when I fitted my curve, but that's okay. Um, I still think my curve did a pretty good job. So, but that brings me to my next question is like, I fit this curve through these data points to give me this relationship between minutes played and fantasy points scored, but is it actually any good? Is this a really good line? And so visuals are one of the ways we can tell if our line of best fit is any good. Um, but here I have lots of points. They're kind of all on top of each other. I can't actually see where the data is, so to speak. This is what's known as overplotting. And so to get around that, you can create like a heat map, or you can basically bin your data. And so um, I've done that. And what's nice about this is actually my my line does seem to be going through where it should be going through. Yes, that's great. So again, we've got minutes played on the x-axis. I've got my fantasy points on the y-axis, and I can see that um, the darker purple colors are like low counts. So any of these like hexagons are where there's only a few players who've played that number of minutes and scored that number of fantasy points. Whereas it's like these lighter colors, that's where a lot of players have played the number of minutes and scored the number of fantasy points, right? And so you want the curve to be going through these lighter areas, and it seems to be doing that pretty well. And if I look at this relationship now, I can see that, um, like here, if a player plays 35 minutes and they roughly score 50 fantasy points, if they play like 30 minutes, they're roughly scoring 40 fantasy points. Um, like 25 minutes. What have I got? Like 30 fantasy points. So like 5 extra minutes on average in the line of best fit here is about 10 extra fantasy points. So and that's like the model starts to be pretty linear from like here on out. The relationship is less linear earlier on. It's more curved here. It's this lower gradient, but from about 25 minutes onwards, this particular model of best fit has pretty linear predictions. Um, yeah. And the one other question I asked when I was looking at this, when I was trying to understand this relationship between the minutes played and the fantasy points scored, was, well, is this relationship the same for all the teams? Or are there like some teams who, if someone picks up 5 minutes, they score way more fantasy points than other teams? And I can say that actually there's not really any difference. This like line of best fit really doesn't change all that much. Um, So each of these lines now are the relationship, the best fit between the minutes played and fantasy points for all the different teams. Um, I couldn't be bothered putting a legend on to show you the different colors because it actually doesn't really matter because it's all so similar. So you can see like the band of uncertainty is actually really quite small. Um, like the fitted, they're all kind of in that like small window. As you get further out, this like becomes a bit of a funnel. There's more uncertainty here, and this is because you can see this dark purple shading here. There's not a lot of players scoring, playing that number of minutes. That's because these are overtime games, right? And so there's not a lot of data. There's less data for prediction, so the line's kind of extrapolating out. And so these areas are less certain. There's bigger questions there. But prior to kind of this point, where most games are played, you can see there's good data and there's a little bit of variability, but not very much. So when you're trying to pick up a different player, it doesn't matter which team they're on in terms of, this player plays 5 more minutes than this player, not really on average. Yeah. And so just a bit of fun there. Interesting to look at. Um, I can talk about how I create these plots if people are interested, but I'm just not sure if that's something people want to see. I think mostly looking at plots is pretty cool. Hopefully your fantasy's going well.